Welcome to the second chapter in this resource, Global Competence. Part of the work we did in the resource, The Future of Learning, was we summarised some research we did some years ago and have been continuing with for some time now on how does the brain actually learn? How does it do what it does? And the upshot of this is that we've realised now that the brain doesn't have a single learning system, but more likely it probably has at least four plus one, and maybe even more learning systems that we haven't actually categorized just yet. So the four basic learning systems that our brain uses is, first of all, sensing our world. Everybody senses the world. We've got lots of senses. We've got sense of balance, pain, hearing, seeing, touching, etc. And those senses allow us to make sense of the world around us. All this data coming in, oh look, I'm getting cold, I need to get warm. They tell us how to react to different situations. Sensing our world is equitable for everybody. No one's got superhuman eyesight, superhuman hearing, etc. Just Superman only. We haven't seen him lately. And what we want to be able to do is make sure that we understand that these senses are equitable for everybody. We're all pretty much the same. They degrade as we get older, but that's one of those things. Our second learning system we identified was the ability to sequence. So sequencing is seen in a number of different contexts. One of the main ones is when we're first born, baby is sitting in here and they're watching your tongue, lips and mouth to see how they can replicate those movements to make those sounds that you're making. They want to copy, okay, and they're programmed to copy these movements here. Okay, so sequencing is used to learn to speak and listen. It also underpins the apprenticeship system where you do this, and this, and there's a cake. Amazing. Or there's a car. Amazing. Or there's a fire. Amazing. A house, whatever it might be. But we do sequencing, and the sequences are one after the other. Okay, and we learn those sequences quite quickly because they kind of make sense. Okay. So sequencing and sensing our world require mostly a neural brain, lots of neurons. And so when we're first born, our brains are mostly neural. But then at about 8 to 10 years old, we have a shift. 8 for girls, 10 for boys. Why this? Well, we think the brokerage around this is to do with our ability to speak and listen. Once the brain has got a message saying, actually, you know what, the vocabulary, our oral vocabulary and our ability to translate through our ears, the listening that we're doing, and that makes sense. Once you get to that point, the brain goes, right, now we need to reconfigure the brain, change the cellular structure. And so it goes from primarily being a neural brain to by our late 20s being mostly an astrocytic brain. So astrocytes are another type of cell in our brain. And neurons can morph into astrocytes, and there's organs in the brain that actually can produce astrocytes dynamically as we need them as well. So what do these astrocytes do? Well, they let us actually do our third learning system, and this kicks in from about 8 to 10 years old. Now, it's not that we can't do these ideas and concepts when we're younger, but we get much better at doing these ideas and concepts once we've actually got that rich vocal media, being able to speak, being able to listen, and also having our senses sensing the world. So once we've got those, the brain goes, right, we need a new set of capabilities now, and these are around ideas and concepts, and that's triggered by our ability to speak and listen well. Ideas and concepts. Right, we need to look at ideas and concepts, and we're going to do that in more detail as we work through this process. But for now, very simply, ideas, relationships between variables. We'll talk about more of this as we move through this series. But relationship between variables, things that change. When you get dressed in the morning, you get up, ready for work, but you get dressed in a particular way based on a bunch of variables. You know, how warm is it outside? Am I working inside or outside? Do I need to impress somebody? Does this match with that? Should I be wearing this instead? My shoes, are they sensible shoes today, or can I wear high heels today? I probably won't, but you might. So every time we make a decision, it's about variables. We look at the variables, we weight them as to how important they are, and that gives us how we get dressed each day. That does not just apply to getting dressed, it applies for every decision we make every day. We are constantly walking algebraic superhumans. We're making algebra decisions every single day of every single moment of the day, virtually every single day of the year, certainly. Decisions based on variables, and we'll talk about this more later on, and there's more work on this in the resource itself. But ideas are relationships between variables, maybe in one or two contexts. So for example, if we're learning to drive a car and we come to our first roundabout, as you come to the roundabout, it's pretty overwhelming, like which lane should I be in, where am I coming off, not quite sure, and so you're focusing on that and sort of driving around the roundabout, and you come out the other side and you go, oh, thank goodness for that. Then we do it a second time, almost straight away. When we're teaching our young people to drive, we don't just do one roundabout and then do another one a week later. We do one roundabout, next roundabout, next roundabout. And after they've done 2 or 3, they're going, I'm kind of getting the idea of this. So an idea is the relationship between all the variables. Where do I need to get off? How fast am I going? How much turning do I need to do? In a couple of contexts. But once you've done 4 or 5 of those contexts, the brain goes, map that pattern, never think about it ever again. So when you go through roundabouts after you've been driving for quite some time, you don't think about it at all. It's a fully automated experience, allowing you to do the one thinking task you can do, which is maybe listening to the person next to you or talking to them or thinking about your day at work and what you've got to do. Yeah, but we don't think about the automated processes we go through every single day, like driving. So ideas and concepts, ideas shift from being a number of contexts, maybe 1 or 2, up until lots of contexts, and then the brain maps that pattern, and you now have the concept of working your way around a roundabout. That's our 3rd learning system. Our 4th learning system is creativity. And miraculously, and hopefully not too surprisingly, everybody, every single one of you is creative. Now, we go through a schooling process which doesn't encourage that, and in fact crushes it in many respects. Ken Robinson sort of blames schools for this process of crushing creativity out of people. Don't think, do as you're told, do this, do that. And that's changing, of course. And the whole notion of what school is now is changing significantly. Ideas, concepts and creativity are two learning systems that are equitable for everybody. So in fact, all 4 of our learning systems so far are equitable for everybody. So why do we get this differential? Why do we get this distribution curve of success? Part of that reason is coming down to our +1 learning system, and that is the ability to learn by rote, off by heart. Now, interestingly, historically, we didn't do much of this. This has been a recent phenomena brought about primarily through reading and writing. When you look at a word and look at the word crow, you can't work it out by looking at it. I think this is something black and possibly a bird. There's no clues. There's no concept underpinning that word. It is just the word we've made up randomly from also randomly selected letters. Okay. Now, reading and writing were fantastic when they first came in because it made a great deal of increased equity of access to information. No longer was it just people in big places and spaces who had special tutors to teach them to read and write. Everybody could read and write. But the difficulty was we didn't read and write equitably because for our other 4 learning systems, there's a history of tens of thousands of generations across millions of years to get to that point. Reading and writing, however, is way back here. We've only got maybe 6 to 12 generations for most Europeans. For Chinese, you might have 20, 30, 40 for some of the Chinese, depending on where you lived in China. Arabs, similar. They've got a point somewhere in between those 2 things. But the number of generations of not just reading and writing, but rote learning of any type that sit behind us give us an advantage or a disadvantage. So if there's no history in your cultural situation and racial situation, then you're going to probably struggle with reading and writing at school. Right? But reading and writing was the only way until recently. And if you ask adults, you know, if you want to find something on the internet, what do you use? They say, well, we use Google. Fantastic. That's great. That's fantastic. Because most of those people, generally speaking, can read and write reasonably well. Young people, though, when you ask them, where do you go for your, you know, to find information, they just go, YouTube. Like, why would you not do that? Because you can just watch the video. Reading and writing, not equitable. Watching the video, absolutely equitable. We've been looking, seeing and interpreting visual elements for millions of years. And we are all equitably able to do that. So if we want equity in education, we've got a real dilemma. Reading and writing is actually getting in the way of success for far too many of our learners. And so how do we get around that? Now, we're not going to drop reading and writing tomorrow, I can guarantee it. But we need to think through, do we give them options? When do we give them the option of sort of, well, maybe if you watch the video. And the flipped classroom is doing that already with incredibly good success. You know, it's working not because we're transitioning the knowledge to the home and then the conversations back to school, but actually it's happening because in fact we're much better. We can actually watch a video and understand the video really, really well. Whereas reading and writing gives us this distribution curve. And the difficulty we now have is that last century it was fine for that distribution curve because that gave us the smart people who would tell the not so smart people what to do in their workplaces. So 20% at the most told 80% what to do. But those days have gone. Now we're sitting in a situation where we need 80% of people to be smart, clever and articulate. Articulate in particular. Okay, 80%. We can only afford 20% to be in this group here, and even then they need to be fairly articulate. So the shift from 80-20 to 20-80 means we have to rethink how we do learning in classrooms around the world. And so this is a provocative sort of statement, really. You know, we're shifting our central notion of accessing information through reading and writing to now watching and viewing and seeing. And that will be a difficult aspect of this resource for most educators to get their heads around, because we were the successful readers and writers. I love books. Around the house here, there are libraries everywhere. You know, I don't know how many we've got, but maybe 7 or 8 libraries of shelves of books, you know. But that came from me and my children, etc. They loved reading books. We had lots of books in the house because I was a good reader-writer. You know, my parents were good readers and writers, and there was a whole bunch of generations behind me that were good readers and writers. And that gave me a slight genetic advantage in terms of learning. But if we compare learning to read and write, which takes 3,000 to 5,000 hours, with driving a car, which takes 50 hours, and the driving the car is much more complicated cognitively, you can see how inefficient learning to read and write actually is. So it is a dilemma. So that is chapter 2. Look, have a read through, get some thinking going on, some reflection on this, because it is a really big gig and we need to do something about this fairly urgently. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in chapter 3. Thank you.